very good morning to you and welcome to the 13th in a series of ICJ Kenya's Justice and Rule of Law. Today we interrogate prosecution of sexual and gender-based violence in Kenya, an issue that has been discussed quite a bit, but not nearly enough. To moderate this session, my name is Teresa Mutua.
Good morning, my name is Elsie Saina.
So stay tuned, follow us and engage us in our social media platforms at ICJ Kenya. We are streaming live in our YouTube channel, ICJ Kenya. Spread the word to your friends and colleagues. Ask your questions, share your comments, give us a shout out. The panelists will respond to you. We have also dedicated a question and answer session from 11:50 to 12:20, where you can call in and speak directly to the panelists. Elsie and I will also pose your questions to the panelists, so don't be quiet. And speaking of panelists, we are excited to be joined by an eminent team of experts who represent the different actors in the justice chain. We are grateful to be joined by Jacqueline Mutere, an SGBV survivor, or should I say conqueror. She is the founder and director of Grace Agenda. Welcome, Jackie. We look forward to engaging you today.
Thank you.
To engage us on investigation and prosecution of SGBV cases, we are honored to be joined by Jacqueline Njagi. Jacqueline is the head of the SGBV division at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Karibu. We have Christine Alai, a human rights and SGBV expert and ICJ Kenya member. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and she will engage us on human rights standards for prosecuting SGBV cases and much, much more. Karibu sana, Christine. Lastly, but definitely not least, we have the Honorable Lady Justice Teresia Mabeka, a High Court judge. She will illuminate to us the intricacies of prosecution of SGBV cases in court. Karibu sana, Judge. And yes, it is an all-women panel, something we quite honestly don't see often. So let me take this opportunity to thank and congratulate ICJ Kenya for taking the lead in promoting the voices of women in this organization, but also in our work. Now, we know that as a country, worldwide even, men and women face SGBV. We also know from evidence that women and girls are disproportionately affected by SGBV. According to Kenya Demographic Health Survey data, 45% of women and girls face a form of gender-based violence annually. The COVID-19 pandemic has seen a heightening in these cases. The National Council on Administration of Justice recorded in March that 35% of cases reported constituted sexual violence cases. However, the increase in cases reported during the pandemic has not automatically resulted in an increased attention by the justice sector to SGBV cases. In fact, the pandemic has brought a negative disruption to prosecution of SGBV cases. The attention given to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic has taken resources, human and financial, away from other issues, including SGBV cases. In court, existing cases have experienced further delays. Survivors with cases in court have challenges in accessing technology solutions that have been preferred by court and other justice actors. Thus, victim participation has been lacking in priority. But we cannot hide in the sand. The statistics are appalling. Where are we dropping the ball? Each of the panelists will have 10 minutes today to give us their thoughts. So allow me to start with you, Christine. We have human rights principles that guide the process and manner in which SGBV cases are prosecuted. Begin us off by sharing with us some of the main normative frameworks that inform responses to SGBV at the national, regional, and global level. Over to you, Tina.
Thank you so much. Thank you, ICJ Kenya, for convening and organizing this debate and this discussion on a critical issue that has been at the forefront of public discourse over the past couple of days, ranging from teenage pregnancies and the causes of such issues to numerous sexual and gender-based violence cases that are reported on a daily basis. Indeed, the statistics are appalling. And whereas we often hear of these cases as crimes, the starting point really is that sexual and gender-based violence is a human rights violation. And this is because it affects numerous fundamental human rights and freedoms that every person is entitled to by virtue of being human. I could mention a few, starting with those that are actually protected within our own constitution. First is the right to be free from discrimination and the right to equality. As we know, sexual and gender-based violence is often rooted in discriminatory gender norms and stereotypes, or unequal power relations that often place certain sectors of our society, mostly women and girls, at a disadvantaged position, as well as children. But not only women and children, men and boys are often disadvantaged due to stereotypes that are related to masculinities, the belief of what it means to be a man, or the reproductive roles and sexual roles that are often associated with women. But at the same time, unequal power relations could also result in sexual and gender-based violence, such as sexual harassment in the workplaces, amongst other forms of violations. Secondly, is the right to human dignity. Sexual and gender-based violence affects our right to dignity because oftentimes these violations are committed against our will, without consent, using threats, using coercion. Thirdly, it affects our rights to bodily integrity. And for instance, our Constitution in Article 29 provides the protection for every person to be free from all forms of violence, including torture, cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, and all forms of physical and psychological violence. And finally, just mentioning a few, is the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and psychological health. As we know, sexual and gender-based violence will often affect our physical health, psychological health, sexual and reproductive health rights that are all protected in our Constitution and numerous international and regional treaties that Kenya has ratified for these protections. Now, most importantly, beyond looking at the rights that are specifically affected, the critical question that we have to ask ourselves today is, what do these rights entail? What does it mean to be protected from discrimination, to be protected from torture or cruel and inhumane treatment? And here we speak of state obligations. Every right will have a corresponding state obligation. And these are classified broadly into 4 areas. First, the state has an obligation to restrain itself and all its state agents, security officers, judiciary, ODPP, county governments, from committing acts or condoning acts, laws, policies, procedures that may result in the commission of sexual and gender-based violence. And this is broadly classified as the obligation to respect rights. Secondly, the state has an obligation to protect every person within its jurisdiction from all forms of sexual and gender-based violence. And this is a positive obligation that requires the state to take all measures within its disposal to ensure that individuals are protected from all forms of known sexual and gender-based violations, that where these violations occur, the state takes specific measures to effectively investigate and prosecute individuals who are responsible for these violations. And when we speak of the individuals responsible, we're not only referring to direct perpetrators, but we're also referring to state or non-state actors who may be responsible for or in charge of perpetrators who commit such violations. And also within protection, the state is required to put in place measures that ensure that any individual who undergoes sexual and gender-based violence will be afforded accessible and adequate protection measures such as healthcare within reach, such as legal aid, such as psychosocial support to enable them to be able to move on with their lives. And finally, under protection still, that the state must afford all persons who undergo sexual violence effective remedies. And here, effective remedies do not only include a conviction of the individual who's responsible for the violations, but also other measures, because we know that victims will often suffer from socioeconomic losses as a result of SGBV. Some of them will contract HIV. Some of them will conceive as a result of SGBV. And so the state must look at effective remedies very broadly, beyond just sentencing, to then include other socioeconomic measures and reparations, broadly speaking, to enable survivors to be able to address trauma, physical harm, and be able to move on with their lives. And thirdly, because we've talked about the obligation to respect, the obligation to protect, the state has an obligation to fulfill. Under the obligation to fulfill, the state must take all practical steps possible: legislative, policy, administrative, special courts, special ODPP units, information and sensitization awareness programs, one-stop centers, to ensure that it's able to achieve the protection of rights of every individual from SGBV. And we can look at this specific obligations more broadly. I think just to narrow down on investigations and prosecution, it's important to note that there's a long referral pathway before survivors eventually end up in a court of law, if they do end up in a court of law. And this is where the obligation to protect becomes very critical. We all know that reporting, and this is not only anecdotal or theoretical, it has actually been established in binding jurisprudence in Kenya, in normative frameworks internationally and regionally, and as well as our own constitutions and laws. First and foremost, reporting that survivors must be afforded accessible, safe measures for them to be able to report violations. And where there's a breakdown in the reporting framework, then we can all see that access to justice becomes a remote reality for many survivors. Beyond that, states must ensure that the well-being of survivors is protected. And this is where healthcare measures, psychosocial support, legal aid assistance becomes critical. Because without affording survivors access to address trauma, to ensure that they have safety from reprisals of perpetrators, then survivors will be unable to access effective justice. And finally, when in the courtroom, certain measures, and this is really just highlighting the key principles and standards, the state must ensure that it's taking effective measures that will guarantee that we're able to identify persons responsible, that we're able to afford survivors an opportunity that does not demand for a high evidentiary threshold beyond what they're able to present in court. So for example, must we demand for P3 forms from survivors? Could a witness statement suffice in court? What happens if a survivor does not have DNA evidence? Does it mean that survivors were not violated? And these are some of the questions that we ask ourselves, including unconscious biases that are often held both by the bar as well as the bench. We will all recall the Chitembwe, the infamous Chitembwe decision, for example, that has been frowned upon for numerous reasons, including how the judge perceived a child, how the judge perceived underlying factors that resulted in the defilement of a young 13-year-old girl, as well as badgering by advocates in the courtroom. We'll have sometimes advocates or defense counsels badgering witnesses on the stand because of the unconscious biases that we wear. So I think at this point I can leave it here, broadly speaking about state obligations, and I hope to have an opportunity to come back to discuss in practical terms, where we have made progress and perhaps where there's still gaps that we need to address.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tina, for that illuminating broad sketch of the normative frameworks that has laid the foundation and the context of our discussion today. Indeed, SGBV is a human rights violation, and at ICJ, we take it very seriously, and that still remains our position. However, at the heart of this discussion, as you've pointedly raised, Tina, is the discussion and experience of victims and survivors of gender-based violence. They bear the largest brunt, especially in dealing with the psychological and, more importantly, the psychological effects. We are privileged today, as Teresa had earlier introduced Jacqueline Mutere today on the panel, herself a survivor and champion, and she champions the voices of many survivors. To enable her to share these experiences, I have two questions for you, Jacqueline, that will sort of lay the context for you. What are, in your experience, Jacqueline, the effects of SGBV on victims in their quest to attain justice? So that's question number one. And two, we would love it if you could please also engage our participants on what measures have been put in place to address the increasing rise of SGBV cases in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you and welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to participate in this on this panel with very eminent ladies. And thank you, Tina, for doing justice to the introduction. Thank you, ICJ also, and all the lady justices and my namesake, Karibu Sana. I started Grace Agenda in 2007, 2008 after our post-election violence. And that was because after the violence, I was violated and I conceived a child. And after that, let me backtrack a little bit. Immediately I was violated. About 3 days later, I went to the hospital. And when I went to the hospital, it was actually a clinic within the estate where I lived. And when I went there, they were closing down because it was during the time of curfew. And even the nurses had to go home very early. So that was about 12 o'clock. I actually arrived at about 11:45, but then I was unable to be treated because the nurses also had to go. So I thought to myself, since the police station is not so far, let me go and report to the police station. And when I went there, the policeman asked me, do you really want to report something like that at this time? Don't you realize and can't you see that there are more serious things that are happening in the country that we need to deal with apart from your report? I don't deny that it's serious, but can you come back later? There are more serious things that need to be happened. Actually, there was a lot of activity in the police station where it was at that time, and there seemed to have been some action from some vigilante groups. So they were taking action there. They were going to patrol in that area. And so I walked away, and I remember thinking to myself, I will never go back again. That was it. Because if I cannot, it's something that happens to you when you're violated. And I consider myself quite an empowered woman. And I thought to myself that reporting and going to hospital is the right thing to do. But just the answer and the reception that I got from the police station in itself just doused any would-be hope that I would ever get justice again. If I was unable to get justice at that very basic level from the government, I would never get justice again. And actually beyond that, I was also dealing with the emotions, the pain in my body, having to manage what would have happened with my other children. I was living with my other children. One of them the eldest was in Form 4 at that time, and the others were small children. And I was trying to manage myself and just not let anybody know that I was going through this physical trauma. And so down the line, when I started my counseling sessions, I met with very many other women and girls who had been violated. And I realized to myself that as an older woman, I'd like to just see what their recovery process was and just to do follow-up. And we made friends with some of them. And when I went to see them, I realized that so many of them had been violated in certain areas. That was mainly Mathare and Kibera and Kawangware. And whenever we went visiting and we would walk within the streets, they would tell me, you see this child? Even this child was born from the violation. You see this child? You see that girl? Even she was violated, even she had a baby. And I realized that this was a very big problem. And so I thought to myself, who will compensate us? Who pays us? Who stands for justice for us? Where will I get justice? Where is the system that that will enable me to get justice. And so during that time, the following month, I was raped in January. In February, if you remember, the Kenya National Dialogue process on February 28th was started. And I thought to one of the key components was to have a TGRC. So I thought to myself that the TGRC would actually offer hope for us. And I participated in that process, and I thought that perhaps that after the report had been written, that very easily that was the way in which we'd be able to get justice. But in talking to many of the women and many of the girls, very few of them actually even dared to go to the police station. First of all, their attitudes were, how can we report the government to government? What sort of justice do you think we would get from government? And for those who did actually even manage to go to hospital, they went because the church, for example, in Kibra, the church had rounded up women, had realized that there were certain violations that had not been taken care of, that people were being taken care of from the mortuary and displaced persons. But the sexual violence, nobody had really taken serious action, I guess, on that. And so MSF and the church, the Catholic Church in Kibra, is what rounded up the women and took them to hospital, to the Kenyatta National Hospital, the Gender-Based Violence Recovery Center, where they were able to get counseling and were able to process their pain towards. But I don't know that they went to counseling or that they went to hospital because they wanted to prosecute somebody, because many of them were gang raped. Many of them, the policemen just went in. A policeman does not leave a calling card. A thug does not leave a calling card. They violate and they leave. So you would not be able to actually you would not be able to pursue justice simply because you'd be able even to get, you cannot pin anybody down. You don't know anybody's identity. You do not know their number. When they come, if they have their identity card numbers, they've got a big jacket on top. So they can't, one cannot. And during that time of violation, are you going to start reading a policeman's ID number, a 9-digit number? Are you going to put it in your head? Or are you just thinking about getting this ordeal done and trying to get yourself to a safe place? So for that has been the experience of many women. Few right now, we perceived that there was hope when there was a public interest litigation that was initiated by a consortium of partners, which your good selves are very much aware of. And we perceived that that was perhaps one of the ways in which we'd be able to get reparations, which is the only form of justice that we'll be able to get: justice for the pain, justice for the trauma, justice for the rejection we had faced from family, from friends, from the communities in which we lived in, and the stigma related to having a child from the violation. I personally had just had a child the previous year. That would have been 2007. That was in June. And then here I am in February, I'm expecting again. That for me was trauma personified. And so in trying to work out through that trauma, I cannot tell you that it took me 3 years to recover from that pain. And that is when I discovered that we needed to do something, somebody needed to pay, and that's when I initiated the Grace Agenda. In terms of what is happening now during COVID, you very aptly introduced, I said you very aptly introduced us that the Chief Justice had said that the 35%, he was concerned at the spike of the numbers of cases, and that they would be given priority. But ask yourself, if the police are beating people because of masks, who will go and report about sexual violence? And in the few occasions where those who have the reports that I've received, in the few occasions where somebody has actually gone to report, they have been told that that is actually not a priority. That first of all, the courts are closed. We cannot get the witness. It is curfew time. The investigations right now cannot take place. So your case, in effect, is actually null and void. And so who is going to pursue justice in that kind of scenario? So we perceive that perhaps even what the justice system needs to be is a bit more serious. And if there were any interventions to be taken, was to perhaps establish special courts specifically for sexual violence. And if there were not special courts, to speed up the process from the police station to speed it up to the hospital and eventually to the courts, where somebody will be able to get justice. Otherwise, the process will be very tedious, and really, it's hopeless, because the survivor, you'd be more, and during this time of COVID, most people are more concerned about putting food on their table, taking care of children, than actually thinking, which is the same instance everywhere, and the reason why many cases are not reported also because you think about more serious things. Do I want to take justice for something that I can probably just get healed from? I know the government, I have no faith in the government. The government will not actually just take up this case. Most likely the policeman was going to be compromised. My case was going to be compromised. Is there any hope for justice? No. So let me go to the hospital, take care of myself, work through this pain, and ensure that my children get a meal on their table, and then and move on with the process of life. That is where things are at the moment. And so in terms of justice, even in the long term, one of the key aspects that the Grace Agenda has wanted to pursue is reparations, because government did acknowledge that indeed that there were violations. The Waki Commission did acknowledge that there were sexual violations. The TJRC report actually had a whole table on how reparations could have been disbursed or distributed and even implemented, but there was no serious political will to implement the TJRC. So if that is the position, even 10 years down the line, actually 12 years down the line, because I usually evaluate together with my daughter's age. She'll be 12 this year. And in 12 years, we have not seen any form of justice. We had hoped that during the 10 billion fund that was announced by the president in 2015, that indeed that survivors of human rights violations would be compensated in some sort of way. But even that and it would be done over a period of 3 years, and a certain figure would be disbursed over that period. But even then, we have tried pursuing it through the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, through various advocacy platforms, through actually just downright seeking them out. But nothing ever actually came to pass. And so we perceive that this might just be another way in which actually sexual violence will just be put under the table. But I'm also grateful for this eminent panel and panelists who take sexual violence very seriously. And I've actually been the wind in my wings that to encourage me and to encourage Grace Agenda and all the other survivors that actually there is hope for justice. Thank you.
And thank you for your amazing courage and even just, taking steps to do something about it. And it's quite an encouragement even for survivors out there that you can do something about it, even sometimes when the system looks like, it's not for you. So thank you very much for your courage, Jackie. We commend you and we celebrate you. Ms. Njagi, hearing what Jackie has said and even the introduction from Tina, I have picked two broad issues: protection of witnesses and victims during investigation and prosecution of SGBV cases on the one hand, and preservation of evidence, ensuring that this evidence is enough and is good and ready to be taken to court. So I guess the question is, what measures or mechanisms have been put in place to ensure that these two areas are prioritized, and up to and including prosecution of SGBV cases within the context of the context of COVID-19, including what Jackie has said. Over to you, Ms. Njagi. Please unmute. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jackie, my namesake, and Christine for the good introduction, and ICJ for bringing up this topic. I must say that as ODPP, we have undertaken various measures to protect our witnesses. Yes, we do protect, or we do assist in protection of witnesses, because at the end of the day, these are the people who are going to reveal what indeed happened, for the matter to go back and to go well in court. But before I go to how we do it, I need to mention that for an SGBV case to be successful, you have to start from a good investigation. A case is as good as the investigation that have been undertaken. If we get shoddy investigations, we are certain not to get anywhere in court. So, like Christine mentioned right at the beginning, is that the biggest challenge is reporting for women. Do they want to report? Or women and girls, do they want to report the case? At times, yes, at times, no, because of the end result. The challenge begins at the beginning, where you report and maybe SGBV cases are not a priority. But We have remedied that as ODPP by undertaking what we call a prosecution-guided investigation. We work hand in hand with our police and identify the areas that need really to be looked at in depth. That is, they have to give us the best investigation. Other than that, we also have to make sure by the time a witness comes to us, they have already been assisted, maybe by accessing medical support, psychosocial support, so that we also get their case as it is. So in a nutshell, for us to be able to get a good case, we need a good investigation. Though we have challenges when it comes to investigation, not all our officers are trained to handle SGBV. This can, I'm sure Jackie can testify to this. We also need to have our evidence well packaged. We must appreciate we don't have a forensic lab that exclusively deals with SGBV cases. We all use the same lab in this country. But we have, as ODPP, been working with the forensic doctors that are there, or the few trained forensic doctors, for us to be able to get the best evidence presented in court, so that we are able, of course, Christine mentioned it's not about convictions, it's about presenting the case in court in the best way possible. So once the matter is reported in court, the evidence is well packaged, the file will obviously come to us as ODPP, and for us to make the decision to charge or whether or not to charge or to delay charging the case, so that our victim is well prepared for court and will be able to articulate his or her case in court. Then eventually we go for prosecution of the case, so that we are able to have the lady or the girl or the girl or the woman well presented in court, and of course get a conviction or get her day in court and her rights are addressed. Of course, at the end of the chain, we have judgment, which we are not in control with. Justice will tell us they're the ones, once the prosecution presents the case, the victim testifies in court, we leave it at the hands of the justice or the court to make a decision.
Thank you, Jackie. Just a follow-up question to that for you in terms of the GBV division at the ODPP. For the benefit of our participants who have joined us online and the members of the public interested to know, what are the mechanisms you have put in place to preserve evidence for purposes of investigation and prosecution, so that we just educate them on the divisions and the mandate and the work of the SGBV division on the ODPP. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Saina. I must say, let me just walk backwards a bit. The SGBV division works on 3 thematic areas. The ODPP SGBV divisions, that is SGBV cases all over the country. We also deal with victim support in GBV cases, and we deal with issues of trafficking in human beings or trafficking in persons. Now, we must appreciate the issue of evidence preservation is not the domain of the ODPP. But that is not to say that we don't actually direct we work with the doctors and the investigators, so that the evidence, the chain of custody of evidence is maintained from one bit to the next person and eventually to court. So I must say that though we are not the ones who preserve the evidence, we direct or we work with the bodies that are supposed to preserve evidence for us and eventually get it to court. Thank you.
Jackie, thank you very much for sharing with us the role of ODPP plays in the prosecution of the SGBV cases. We're also glad to hear that indeed the ODPP has prioritized the prosecution of these cases, particularly since they're increasing in the context of COVID. And more importantly, weaving in the preservation of questions of chain of custody, the preservation of evidence for victims who constitute mostly the vulnerable in society. So allow me now to bring in Justice Matleka to give us the perspectives of the courts. Judge, I wish to pose 2 questions for you today. One, One is, how has the judiciary been able to afford survivors of SGBV immediate protection? Christina has alluded to the need to fulfill state obligations, and what, in your experience in the courts, have this also included measures like interim orders? And number two, excuse me, is, are there any challenges that have hindered expeditious disposal of these sexual and gender-based cases from your perspective? Karibu sana, Justice.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to share. First, I must begin by thanking ICJ for this moment, which is really important in that the kind of discussion we are having today not only reflects on just women and girls or the persons who are violated, but on the whole community, on the whole society, on our whole nation. And listening to Jacqueline Mutere, it transported me back to court, you know, when we listen to persons who have gone through these violations. And Jacqueline, as she said, is well-empowered, knowledgeable person who can speak her mind. So imagine that person who is not that well-empowered, who, you know, is scared of everyone, including the court and the persons around them, how they feel when they have to talk about these things. A person who has not even been counseled, you know. Listening to Jacqueline, I can see that the counseling, what she's gone through, has assisted her to be able to speak to us the way she's speaking today. There are many victims who just want to hide behind a door and not say a thing. So I'm grateful that we are able to speak about this on this platform and to be able to share as openly as Jacqueline has done. It is important for us to know that, you know, just to recap that these things, before they get to the judiciary, they start from quite far. You've had Jacqueline. By the time the matter gets to court, so much has happened. Just using Jacqueline's story alone, she's been violated. She has neighbors who maybe didn't do something. Then she goes to a clinic, nothing. She goes to the police station, nothing. So by the time she gets to court, you know, the moment of immediate intervention, Elsie, has passed, you know, so that by the time someone comes to court, the expectations are so high because they have been failed so much along the way. And that is why I think the court gets the brunt of the whole thing, because what has happened before with the victim does not come out in the open until the victim starts to speak. But when they come to seek assistance, I just wish, and I like what Christine said earlier, you know, the standards have been set. What should happen? And I think listening to Jacqueline from ODPP, you can see that there are very many issues that are there. But what does the judiciary do? What has the judiciary done? The judiciary has not started doing something during COVID. You know that the CJ, our Chief Justice, actually raised the alarm that the NCAJ has noticed there was a spike in these cases. So it is important to realize that it is not just when the matter is in court that the judiciary must do something. It must start from before. And how do we, what do I mean by this? For that officer who is sitting there to be able to give Jacqueline the order she needs, that officer must be aware of what needs to be done. There's a certain level of consciousness, of understanding that the officer must have. And what I know, and I've been a beneficiary of that, is the different kinds of trainings that must be done so that to conscientize judicial officers to be prepared to be able to do this. Because you can't expect a protection order from a person who may not really understand, who may have that unconscious bias that Christine spoke about. So the judiciary has tried over the years to train its officers to be able to have this, maybe not everyone has gone through it, but to be able to have this understanding that SGBV cases are not the same as all the other cases. Secondly, when it comes to children, you know that we have those children courts that deal with these particular issues. And importantly, the court uses committees that have to deal with this. I'm just laying down that infrastructure, because without it, then the victim who needs this help may not get it, because the people around the court who are supposed to support the victim do not have the awareness, do not have the knowledge, do not have the tools to be able to support the victim to get the orders that that victim requires. So you asked about immediate protection. You see, the court must be moved. You know, the court must be moved. So if the court is not moved by a party, if somebody has been violated and they are sitting in the village, they are sitting in the house, and they are sitting somewhere, the court cannot help you. That matter must be brought to court, and under the law, the protection from domestic violence, you can clearly see that so many people can assist a person to get the orders they need, especially protective orders. Not just the person who is affected, but the other persons around them can actually go to court and ask for these orders. But as I was preparing for this, I asked myself, how many applications have we seen? In fact, Elsie, I don't know whether you know how many have been brought either by a police officer, by a neighbor, you know, by other persons who are not the ones who are actually affected by the violence, to actually ask a court to protect a person who is going through domestic violence or any other form of violence. I haven't come across any, you know, where somebody has actually come to court asking me to protect someone who is being affected by, particularly an adult. For children, it's a bit different, because courts will receive these matters either as the defilement case or the abuse case, or luckily as a child in need of care and protection. And courts have gone out of their way to make orders to rescue children who are being violated at home, who are being abused by, you know, whoever in their families or wherever it is that the abuse is happening, making orders to rescue those children from those places and placing them in what they consider to be places of safety. We are all in agreement, we do not have those places of safety. We don't have sufficient rescue places. So you find that as much as the court will want to give that order to protect this person, where are they going to take them? You know, so courts will give the orders where there's a place to take this person or where this person needs protection. Challenges of removing one member of the family from the home, interim orders have been made. That one I can assure you, so long as the court has been moved and sufficient evidence has been placed before the court. Of course, we are aware, and Christine talked about it, the jurisprudence that we have is like this. You know, I would say that it is very good jurisprudence, very protective. Remember the Ripples case, the right to investigation of a case. You know, the court declared that and said, actually, if you don't investigate a case, it's a violation of someone's human rights, fundamental rights and freedoms. Because when you don't investigate, then what happens? Their right to health, their right to life, their right to access to justice are all violated. So courts have not just sat back. By making those pronouncements and holding people accountable, courts have done something for victims. What else have courts done? We know that when you talk about reparations and compensation, the courts have made that declaration that a victim of a sexual offense can be compensated even if that accused person has been acquitted. Why? Because as Christine was saying, there's an issue of balance of evidence. In a criminal case, there is what you need, and in a civil case, there is what you need. So courts have also gone out of their way to actually go deep into these laws and find, interpret these laws in such a way as to ensure that the victim is actually protected. Then we have the other, which is for me a very big thing. I think the most, for me, important is that the victim has always been seen as the witness for the state. Christine, Jacqueline, you'll agree with me. For a long time, the victim, and that has not changed a lot actually, has been seen as only a witness for the state, who comes and stands in the dock only to prove that the accused person is guilty. But courts have also declared that a victim has a right to participate in those proceedings and be able to bring out their case, you know, because as I said, courts must be moved. So the fact that courts have made that declaration that a victim can come to court and participate in those proceedings, I think courts have done quite a bit. The issue then will come to how do we ensure that all these things that have been declared good for the victim, to ensure when the victim appears in court, the victim gets the justice that they need. I feel so sad when I hear Jacqueline Matere say that is there hope for justice, and she has a big emphatic no. It makes me very sad because you know, there's nothing as bad as feeling that you are hitting a wall and you're looking for justice. So out of these discussions, I hope that we can be able to work together, because we can't do it alone. Courts can't do it alone, we've seen that. ODPP cannot do it alone. We must all face it together so that we ensure that justice is done for these persons. And therefore, as we ask what courts have done, I want to just end my opening comments by saying that all these things that have been done can only bring justice to the victim if we work together, if we do it together, so that we form that chain link for justice for the victims. I think I want to stop there and wait for the next question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Judge. It's interesting that you raise two pertinent issues, questions of intermediaries, that maybe we can direct that question back to Christine Njagi of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions on who can move a case on behalf of a victim in court. And maybe Jackie can tell us about the experience, if any, at the ODPP. And then secondly, Judge, you've also raised the question of the challenge around places of safety, both for the children and also for adults, whether it is men experiencing SGBV or women experiencing SGBV. And a case in point is that we recently learned that the Makueni County has actually put up a shelter for women as a trailblazer in trying to respond to SGBV in the context of COVID. So it would be interesting to see whether other counties also take up the same challenge and same emulate what the Makueni County has done in with respect to responding to SGBV. So thank you very much, Judge. And of course, your rallying call, we can only do this together as all the justice chain actors. So allow me to invite Teresa to proceed with the next question from our panelists. Thank you very much, Judge. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Elsie, and thank you, Judge, for a wonderful presentation. And just before we delve, I say it's time to delve into our interactive session, but just before we do that, allow me to also just bring in Christine a bit, because Christine is an advocate. You're an advocate, Christine, and you've been involved as counsel for victims. So I see you in a quite critical position, where you've listened to challenges, gaps, but also things that the judiciary has done, and equally challenges and gaps, but also steps that the ODPP has done. And the question I sit here and tell myself is then where is the gap? Why is Jackie from Grace Agenda still saying, like Judge pointed out, that there is no justice? Where is the gap? Where is the problem? So if you would address that, Tina, just tell us what solutions would you propose towards the challenges and the gaps highlighted, things that would alleviate the plight of survivors of SGBV in the criminal justice system.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Jackie, for sharing your story numerous times. I think what the discussions highlight for us is that our challenge is not laws, our challenge is not policies, our challenge is not administrative measures. In fact, from where we sit, and numerous studies that have been conducted demonstrate this, we have imported the stereotypes, the discrimination, and how we perceive sexual and gender-based violence within the community into the formal sector, such that every mechanism that survivors interact with, they are faced with the same discrimination, so to speak. It may not be direct discrimination, it may be overt. For example, when you have to encounter a police officer who poses the questions such as those that were posed to Jackie and to numerous other survivors, where sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence are deprioritized, are diminished, are minimized, and not perceived as being of similar magnitude or gravity as other forms of violence. And for as long as this perception persists, we will continue to have these quote unquote talk shops, right? Where we identify the challenges, we identify the gaps, we listen to survivor stories, but nothing will ever change. And so this is the challenge to the state, because look at all the gaps that are being raised, and we do not even have the police officers sitting with us here today. We don't have the health sector sitting with us here today. You'll oftentimes hear the state talk about gender desks. A study that we recently did that was launched in December 2019, Physicians for Human Rights in partnership with the United Nations, UN Women, and Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, identifying critical gaps in these gender desks. Oftentimes, to illustrate, it is the laziest, the person who's perceived to be weakest and most vulnerable is the one put at the gender desk, either because they're expectant or they don't have the energy to move around as much. And guess what? The gender desks will close at 5 p.m. like any other office, that provides other types of services. Never you mind that they offer a very critical service. Healthcare services, we've been talking about forensic evidence, for example. How many health facilities as we speak even have rape kits to be able to collect a simple swab? And you begin to see the disconnect between the expectation in a court of law. A victim is required to present such a high standard of evidence when no measures have been put in place to equip the service providers or this survivor to obtain that evidence. And so all of this speak to importing, we do not prioritize SGBV as a nation. We have not provided sufficient resources. We have not provided sufficient budgetary allocation. We have a lack of administrative mechanisms. Let's talk about data, for example. Each sector is collecting their own data. Judiciary will tell you about 35%, for instance, but is the judiciary able to connect that 35% back to a health facility that reported that documented that case? Is the judiciary able to connect that case back to Jackie? We're not. We do not have a system that can tell us the true health of our nation when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence. And I dare say that the starting point is a shift of attitude. Holistic. We must begin to shift our mentality about what SGBV is, begin to truly address the root causes of SGBV, which start from equality and non-discrimination. And that requires a huge investment. It requires significant political will. We want to hear our president state that SGBV is a national crisis. The statistics back this up. And we know what we have done as a nation. When there is a crisis, we provide resources. We have done it for COVID. We have done it for anti-corruption. We have done it for terrorism. Why can't we do it for SGBV? And when we have a shift of attitude, we will begin to have sufficient investments in dollars, in shillings, in institutions. The second recommendation that I would make, which had been proposed by the Waki Commission since 2008, is to establish an office of a special rapporteur on sexual and gender-based violence. And this office would be responsible for making the connections between the community, the health sector, the police, the judiciary, the various ministries that are responsible for ensuring that survivors are protected, that we get access to justice and we prevent future cases. I'd just like to end here by illustrating another point, using a case that links to Jackie's case. This is Constitutional Petition number 122 of 2013, filed by 8 survivors of post-election violence, 6 female who were raped, including 3 who were gang raped by state security officers, 2 male survivors who were forcefully circumcised by Mongiki in Naivasha, courageously filed their petition in court in February 2013. Guess what? 7 years later, we're still in court. 7 years later, and at least 31 hearings, we're still in court. In the hands of 6 judges, we're still in court. This morning, we were to appear before Justice Korir for a mention, where we would hopefully get a judgment date. It did not materialize. This is not just the plight of these 8 victims, it is the plight of numerous victims of sexual and gender-based violence, and woe unto you if it involves the state. And so the bottom line is this, Teresa. The state has failed to prioritize prevention and effective response to sexual and gender-based violence. And if we sat here all day, we could identify gaps in every single sector. And that will continue to be the reality until we shift our mindset and begin to make the necessary investments so that we can protect our children, our women, our girls, our men and boys from continued SGBV.
And Christine, and a wonderful call to action, both for the state to put their money where their mouth is, and give us, enough resources, both financial, human resources, capacity, because we've had from, the rest of the panelists in terms of capacity, and I think every panelist has identified from capacity of judicial officers to capacity of police officers to health workers, capacity is a recurring challenge, and this is something that needs to be addressed. So thank you very much, Christine. Without further ado, allow me to delve into the question and answer session. Thank you so much, audience, for being interactive and saying your questions. I'll go straight to the questions that we have. Elsie?
Thank you, Teresa. I'll start with a question that has been raised by Lydia Muthiani. She says that, thank you for the wonderful presentations. She has a question for Jackie. Jackie Mutere has presented a petition to the Senate seeking urgent action on the TJ report. What progress has there been on this, Jackie? Have any victims been involved or consulted by the Senate? So Jackie, you had your hand up. So if you could respond to that question as well as, raise the point you wanted to raise. We noted that you raised your hand. That's for Jackie. For ODPP, a similar question. What has been the experience of the ODPP with cases where forensic evidence is not available? Jackie? In addition to that, Jackie, would be happy if you could address the question raised by a judge around if you've had experiences around intermediaries bringing cases on behalf of victims, if any. So if we could have that first round of questions. And then there's a comment from Masinja Roge. Masinja Roge is saying, Jackie Mutere is a beacon of hope for many survivors. Her story is truly inspiring. So I'll stop that, and then we can come back to more questions for Tina and also for the judge. So if you can go, Jackie Mutere, and then the Jackie from ODPP. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elsie. I'll start by answering Lydia's questions. When we presented our petition to the Senate and we had a panel with them, the whole AG's office was on one side and the 3 of us were on the other side. And we had a big shebang about what was workable, what was not workable, what could not be done, because a certain section that could not have been. There's a certain section in law that cannot be passed because Parliament had not passed it, and therefore the Senate could not discuss it. I'm giving you the long and short of all those the 1 hour discussion that we took place there. I presented I presented a picture of what it has been like for many of the survivors, what their lives has been like, the impunity they have experienced because of the years of neglect by the state, and all the Senate. It was Mr. Cherargei, on Senator Cherargei, who, in the long and short of it all, committed to do an undertaking to ensure that justice was going to be served, and that he would ensure that we participated in it, that he was going to convene a select committee, both from the lower house, which is Parliament, and of the Senate, and a joint committee, not select committee, a joint committee of the two houses, and actually deliberate on that one section that needed to be changed so that reparations could be implemented. So that is where we left it. That was last year in November, and we have never heard from him, despite various calls. We have called his clerk, we have called him personally, but politics takes precedence over these things. Secondly, what I had raised my hand to do was, and for this I would beg that Lady Justice and my namesake would just wear bulletproof briefly, as you allowed me to shoot you a little bit. That there really is no political will in sexual violence. Do you remember the 5,000 cases that the ODPP had compiled from the post-election violence that was supposed to be investigated? To date, have you had anything? Absolutely nothing. And so those would have been some of the ideal things that would have shown commitment to SGBV, commitment to protection, commitment to prosecution, commitment to convict sexual violence. Those that have been one of, even if they have gotten 3 out of those 5,000 cases and run with those ones and shown that there was justice that has been served, or even run with them, take them to court and say that there was not enough evidence. And of course, again, the onus, I don't know why the onus remains on the survivor to present to the state. And as you so aptly said, Lady Justice, that we become state witnesses. But why should the burden fall on us to prove that we were raped? The burden should be on the perpetrator to defend himself that he did not do it, you see? And so based on that, I would like to go back to Tina's point on conviction. Conviction is one thing, but justice means different things to different people. And having worked with many of the survivors, because of the 7 years that it has taken for the public interest litigation case to get justice, sexual violence, the survivors would simply say, really, this is just not worth it. For 7 years, what have I been eating? What has happened to the children? What about the exposure? What about the stigma that I've experienced? Is it really worth it? And so others would simply opt. And in fact, Tina, while she was still at PHR, took survivors through a process of actually wondering what would justice mean to you, and took us through the TGRC table that had been presented. And some said that they would rather just get a pension from the state. Others said that they would rather the education for the children. Others who had not yet finished school and had been gang raped wanted education for both themselves and the children. Simple things that CDF is doing right now, Equity Fund is doing right now, National, where the NGAF is doing right now, things that could have been taken up. And so I would have thought, I'm thinking that one of the things that could be done also is if your good self, Lady Justice and Jacqueline, could even coordinate together with the NGAF, the CDF, to get some of this violation, and together with the county government, in acknowledging that, first of all, violence did take place, justice needs to be served, and in the spirit of getting a legacy for His Excellency, that some of these old things can just bring closure to them once and for all. Because I tell you, me, Jackie, maybe the other ones won't. The reason I started this is because, Lady Justice, I won't let you rest until the day you come out of that office. My namesake, I will not let you rest until justice is served for these other women. I'm the one who is empowered. There are others who are sitting still with, they've got fistula. Others are still sitting, holding themselves like this, wondering when will it ever have. Getting phone calls every day from women who are really still violated. The ones with children are neglected, beaten to date. Girls going into marriage as a form of rescue just to cover themselves, just as a form of healing. Justice means different things to different people, and I urge you really to please seek it out for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And I see the passion with which you speak with, and I commend it. We have Jackie from ODPP. You can go ahead and answer the questions.
Thank you very much. I want to start with a question on intermediaries for victims. Have we used intermediaries for victims in SGBV cases? I must say yes. And I'll give an example. Late last year, we had a victim who was mentally retarded, but could express themselves in a certain way, and the only person who would understand the language was the mother. So in this case, in Makueni, we had to use an intermediary. Yes, it is an option that is available for persons or victims who cannot express themselves, or if they express themselves and the court cannot understand, maybe a guardian could come in as an intermediary for that particular victim. So yes, they are allowed in court. The other question was by Mudiane, where we have evidence and we don't have forensic evidence. Can we go ahead and prosecute that case without the forensic evidence? I must admit at times the court also approaches a case where there's no forensic evidence with caution, because we are going to commit maybe an accused person for a lifetime in court. It has, in some situations, I know in other jurisdictions where courts have convicted without forensic evidence, in instances where maybe the perpetrator had a weapon that could be described or could be brought out, had been used to threaten a victim. But in Kenya, we approach cases for SGBV where there is no forensic evidence with great caution, but at times in children cases, we really at times, if it can be corroborated with something else, yes, we can proceed. But again, like I said right from the beginning, once the ODPP presents its evidence, deals with the witnesses, well, with or without forensic evidence, we leave it to the court to make the final decision.
Thank you very much, Jackie. We have a caller online on standby, Ndindi Nganga. If you can hear me, Ndindi, please go ahead with your question, make it brief and to the person you're directing it to.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to ICJ. The discussion is very good. It's good to see my friend Christine Alai there, and also Justice Matheka. It's good to see you again. I have one comment and two questions. My one comment is that I totally agree with what Christine Alai said about the shift of attitude. It has been an uphill task having to deal with the various stakeholders that are supposed to be there to protect the survivors in their journey through, in their journey in accessing justice, and it has been a very uphill task. I recall one scenario in which we even had to sit down with court officers to train them on how to even announce cases in court, or even how to talk about a file, things like that, in the full hearing of everybody, whether it's in open court, wherever it is, and we had to actually take them through that. Therefore, it's a whole shift of attitude, a whole shift of perceptions. Anyway, to my question, I have two questions. Number one, to Jackie Njagi or DPP, we have had several cases, especially in out-of-town stations, where certain SGBV cases collapse because they have decided to resolve in courts the case through alternative ways, wazee wanakutana. And we have tried on numerous occasions to inform people that SGBV cases cannot be resolved through ADR measures. And we've had this kind of discourse even with fellow advocates, with ODPP officers, on the parameters of ADR within various sectors. And one of them in which we kept on emphasizing is that SGBV cases cannot be resolved. You cannot just come to for example, if it's a minor we're dealing with, go to the parents, you pay something for, in quotes, the damage, And perhaps if the child or the adult was impregnated, then you pay something and then the case collapses because the witnesses do not decide not to come to court. So perhaps you can comment on that in terms of, are you aware that that is going on? My second comment to Justice Matheka, previously we've had, we have tried to seek audience with courts in various parts of Kenya, and especially when you're watching Brief for Survivors. And I don't know why there's certain judicial officers who think that we do not have audience as advocates to address the court, to cross-examine, to file submissions on behalf of survivors. I don't know, is it something that we need practice directions on, or I'm not sure what is happening there. So kindly comment on that. Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
For joining us and for asking the questions. Your questions relate to other questions that we've received. Allow me to just go through them real quick. We have Abdullahi Mohammed, who says he works for an organization called Womankind, and he asks, what is our take? Perhaps, Judge, you can join that with the question from Dindi. What is our take on alternative form of dispute resolution that is common in his community, which is the Somali community? There's also equally a question from Beverly to you, Judge, whether victims of domestic violence have been able to get orders under the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act, something you were talking about earlier. A question from Linda also, saying that she's happy to see Judge mentioned the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act and the avenues that can be used to access justice in SGBV. And her question is how awareness can be increased amongst different stakeholders so that the avenues under the PDVA, the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act, can then be useful. And perhaps that goes into something you were talking about, the CUC's, Judge. Perhaps you can take that as well. Lastly, we have Judith Athiambo. Thank you for watching and being with us. She asks, SGBV is being normalized, especially within the police when handling them. It's a comment, but goes also to talk to what Tina was saying in terms of we need a change of attitude. And perhaps if you have a comment, Judge, you can then add that as well. Lastly, Kevin Onyata says, listening to Jackie Mutere's story, he'd like to comment that we need to create awareness amongst health practitioners. And he says, in her experience, if her experience is anything indicative, the lack of awareness among health workers as far as GBV is concerned. What is Jackie's experience in terms of awareness of health workers as far as SGBV is concerned? So most of the questions go to Judge. So kindly, Judge, you could go first. There's a question to Tina and a question to Jackie of Grace Agenda.
Thank you. Just before Tina comes on and before Judge responds, also a question for you, Tina, directly. There's a question that came earlier from Lois Wafula asking, where is the safe house for women who are battered in Nairobi? Maybe, Tina, you can also tie that as part of information for the public around safe houses for women who've been women of domestic violence. Thank you. Over to Judge.
Over to you, Judge.
Thank you very much for the many questions. It is I'm glad that at least people are listening and participating. And I'm sure out of this, that means that the discussion can continue elsewhere or it's ongoing elsewhere. And that's the important thing, that this conversation has been started and it's going to be ongoing. I want to start with the issue of Maslahi. That this is happening out there. I think you're aware that the judiciary was looking into the AJS, Alternative Justice Systems issues as it is put out in the Constitution, Article 159. And I remember when working at JTI, attending some trainings in Garissa, because the issue was, how do we make this our cultural organizations that we are looking at, like the clans, the members of the clans who are serious people within and who are listened to, understand that some of these things must be looked at through the lens of our Article 27 of non-discrimination. That you cannot say that you are doing justice to a person whose pain you don't understand. I remember addressing some elders, and just allow me to share this for 1 second. Some elders in that area, we were in Garissa, and that discussion came up. And I remember asking them a question, that when you sit down to discuss these issues and you settle this matter, where is the child or the woman who has been violated? And you know, it was a classroom full of a lot of men, with a few women from, I think, 1 or 2 NGOs who are present. And I asked it in the most, how do I say, not crude, but open way, that does any of you know how it feels to be defiled? I asked those wazee, I said, wazee tafadhali munisamehe, si matusi, I'm just asking you this question so that we can tuelewane. Does any of you know how it feels to be defiled? When you go and discuss that you're going to pay a cow, or camels to this person, or to this family whose daughter has been defiled, have you spoken to that child, to that girl, or that that lady who has been raped or defiled? And you could see that for a moment that there was a bit of consternation in the room, because I think that is what needs to go out. When these elders are discussing these things, do they understand? Do they know? It is not about the family, it's about the individual person. Because yule ambaye amefanyiwa this, I always say, it is her, I don't know the right word in English, but utu. What is the word for utu in English? Sijui, I only know it in Kiswahili. Of that person that has been taken away. The person,
dignity.
The person who has been defiled or raped. Even dignity doesn't sound as strong as utu. The utu wa huyo mtu has been taken away. So how do you pay for that? So it is not acceptable. It has been refused by the Constitution, and we need to speak that strongly. The person who asked that question, we need to speak not just to the Maslahi, but to any other that is doing that with relation to SGBV. Because that is how we reduce human beings to nothing, when we think that we can pay for their pain with things. It's not payable. Then about awareness on all these good things, the laws, the policies, the jurisprudence, and that exists, that is available for the supporting victims of this of SGBV. At least within the justice system, we have the NCAJ structure. That is the National Council on Administration of Justice, that cascades down as the court users committees. And all the court users sit on those committees. There is also the children court users committees that are specialized in issues to do with children. So if awareness can be created through that structure, so that everybody who uses the court, or is a court user, that's the police, the members of the public, the other people, probation, children department, the judicial officers, all those people are on top of things. And it is important that it is done. Like I said earlier, you require a certain level of consciousness, to be able to appreciate what a victim of SGBV goes through. So that is important that we do that, and it can be done through that that system. We have the task force on children matters, the special task force on children matters. I think both the ICJ members know about it, and the work that it has been doing. Apart from just being a task force that was given some TORs to do, to find out certain things, I'm sure you are aware that that task force is a working task force on a daily basis, where we get reports, and everybody on that task force runs around in their own area. If it's the police that, if a report comes from, the other day one came from somewhere inside the interior of, I think somewhere in Beta, reported on that wall, and everybody is tasked to do their bit, So there is something happening, at least through that as well. You'll find that there are things or recommendations and actual actions that have been done. One I would like to talk about right here is the issue of the protective measures for a child, especially a child who is exposed to domestic violence or who has been violated. Even when the police are not investigating, even when the report has been rejected at the police station, we have a mechanism, and people know about this, that is a child in need of care and protection. And that child's report can be given to the children officer, who will have a file opened, a protection and care file, where all these other things that we are talking about, the counseling, the treatment, even the going after to check with the family to see what is going on in that place, that can happen as an alternative way of dealing with the matter, even as the investigations are ongoing or people are refusing to take action. This other system can be used to deal with the situation, and we must embrace it because it is in our law, so that we are able to also protect the most vulnerable persons. Then when it comes to judicial officers not listening to people who watch brief, there's an authority that I found, I just lost the citation, but the name of the appellant in that case was someone called Joseph Lendrix Waswa. I will find it maybe in the course of, or one of you might be aware of it, where the court was very clear that a victim has a right to participate in court, to participate fully in court, and present through their lawyers and present whatever evidence they need to present, file submissions, ask questions when necessary. I'll get the citation and post it on our chat. So I think I hope I've answered the questions, but I wanted to just make a comment on what the question I asked earlier about the Domestic Protection Act. It was not about intermediaries, but basically how, if people don't know that they can report a case on behalf of another person, whether other people have been able to bring these cases on behalf of others who are unable to do it. Not necessarily an intermediary, but another person, a police officer, a neighbor, a friend, a relative, just being able to take a case to court because Teresia here is incapacitated by her fear or whatever it is to take the matter to court. So we need to create awareness around that. So basically, I think I've answered, I think, the questions. If there is, and about, SGBV being normalized. Let me just say this, that the failure or the inability of the state, and I say this from an experience of frustration sometimes, to provide what Christine was talking about, the capacity to investigate these cases is very saddening, because like we said, cases get lost because there is not enough evidence, it's not properly packaged. And Jacqueline Matero was talking about the perpetrator must prove his innocence. That is not our criminal justice system. Our criminal justice system is that the perpetrator is innocent until we prove him guilty. That is our system. But let me say that the case that spoke about, that I mentioned, I think the accused there was somebody, it was the case where the people went to court about teachers. Remember the case where the TSC and the teacher, children who get violated in schools, and the court was able to say that those children ought to be compensated. I think that is a good case to be followed, where people can be able to look at it and say, when I'm pursuing a criminal case, I can also pursue a civil case and seek compensation. So that is, I think, a good jurisprudence that can be followed to take care of a situation, of the situation where we feel like, oh, maybe these cases are being normalized. No, jurisprudence that we have is, if properly used and has come from the courts, can show that the courts are saying, no, it's not normal, and we can fight this through different ways. And those tools are available in the way the courts have interpreted the law. So thank you for now.
Thank you so much, Josh. There was a question for you, Tina. Perhaps you can take that.
Yes, thank you. I saw questions from Lydia and Agatha that were following up on the petition 122. I think, broadly speaking, the challenges have really emanated fast. There was a 1-year delay by the state in responding. The Attorney General did not put in their response for an entire year. And it was only until January 2014, using social media advocacy, Agatha, that we eventually got a response from the Attorney General to the case. And since then, we've had issues which are common to many other cases before the court. But for sure, this stands out. You know, today when we looked at the cause list, you have cases from 2017, 2018, 2019. And our case stands out, 2013, it's glaring. You'll have judges being transferred and no mechanisms are put in place to ensure that there's quick continuity in the case. In one case, last year, February, Justice Chacha Mwita was transferred on the 8th of February to take effect on the 1st of March. Less than a month. And the question that we were left asking ourselves is, really, how does the judiciary safeguard the rights of individuals to access justice in such kind of systems, right? And since then, Justice Korir took over the case from last year, May. All we needed to get was a date for submissions. We are in June 2020, 1 year later, without a date for submission. So I'm just pointing out those illustrations to demonstrate that it's not really for lack of trying to fast track. We have been engaged in advocacy. What we are lacking is political will, including from the judiciary, including from the Office of the Attorney General, including from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, with delayed responses and so on. But this is really just a reflection of what we said earlier, the failure to prioritize. Salome asked about marital rape. There was a confusion in the Sexual Offences Act, or perhaps provisions in the Sexual Offences Act that suggested that there couldn't be marital rape under our laws. But the 2015 Protection Against Domestic Violence Act has now clarified that, in fact, sexual violence and rape occurring in the context of domestic violence is considered as a prohibited violation. And therefore, there's no longer a doubt under the law. There was never a doubt under human rights law. It was always clear that marital rape is a violation. But now under Kenyan law, it is clarified that marital rape does constitute a violation, particularly when you read the Sexual Offences Act together with the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act. So finally, and is this where we give our parting shot, Teresa, or?
I'll come to you back. I'll come back to you to give closing remarks. But allow me to just ask Jacqueline from ODPP, because I think there are very important questions that have been raised by our participants that we can answer before we wind up. So to you, Jackie, does the Director of Public Prosecution or the victim have power under the law to move the court to set aside a traditional settlement? And what happens in a case of traditional settlement where witnesses refuse or fail to attend court? The victim case is never adjudicated upon. Alice Yuma asks you as well whether there are specific police officers that can be assigned to handle SGBV cases so that training and awareness creation can be specific. Thank you all for your questions and for your questions. Our panelists will keep answering as we proceed, but over to you, Jacqueline.
Very much for that question. Can we move to court to, you can hear me? Can you move to court to set aside a traditional justice settlement? First and foremost, Jack mentioned that sexual offenses cases cannot be settled out of court. Much as we say they cannot be settled out of court, we can also not deny that it is happening and happening openly. Case in point is the Mandera case, where we saw a young girl who had been raped by a chief and the elders ran ahead to settle that matter. Now, most of the times we cannot, these are not judgments that are even acceptable by the court. So with or without a settlement out there, the court will proceed and hear the case. But the challenge as ODPP we have faced is that once there's a purported settlement, the victim and the witnesses totally frustrate the criminal process or the court process. So the ODPP is left with a case that can't be settled because we don't have witnesses to present in court, and we don't have, though it can't be settled, we don't have any thing to do with it. The best that the ODPP does at that point is to let the matter just hang in court until when, if and when we get sufficient evidence and the witnesses to come to court. The second case is, do we have, the question, sorry, do we have police who can be trained on gender issues? I could say, yes, it has happened in the past, but the challenge is in the investigation system is that, well, they are not totally specialized to have a gender unit that strictly remains gender to deal with SGBV issues. So what happens? Once they're trained, they most certainly move to other duties after a while. So we will never fill this gap of having specialized officers to deal with SGBV cases as long as they keep moving. We have, yes, they have been trained in the past. We have a resource that can be trained. We need to explore a situation whereby we have specialized policemen who will be trained specifically for gender issues and not move to other departments or units, so that we have people who appreciate the gender issues, right from the investigation all the way to judiciary.
Right. To enable us tie up the discussions that continue to be interesting, I will now invite our panelists to give us their closing remarks. I'll begin with you, Jacqueline of Grace Agenda, followed by Jackie of ODPP, Tina Alai, and then we'll finally have Judge Matheka. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can I answer the question somebody had asked me about what the perception of health workers and the awareness to SGBV? Of course, they are aware because they're one of the first respondents there. But many a times the attitude is that just another client who has come to hospital. That's what usually happens. And apart from the occasional, oh pole, unasikia uchungu, pole, geuka hivi, lazima niangalie. It's just, for them, it's just work as usual. And to state this further, when I actually went to have the baby, I was 41 at that time, quite a senior. And the young doctor who was clerking, for lack of a better word, was clerking me, was asking, and how old are you? I said, I'm 41. And then he looked at me like, you're 41? You mean you're still having sex and you're 41? You mean you can still come to have a baby when you're 41? And I looked at him like, yeah, so what? So what? And that, to me, spoke to me many things. I also I have a background in the medical profession, but it also spoke to me about just the hang-ups and the preconceived ideas that a lot of people have. It doesn't matter whether you're police, whether you're medical staff, whether you pretend you're humanity, Lady Justice and the legal fraternity, that in this current political dispensation, that if you are able to influence the Building Bridges initiative, please speak about justice for sexual violence. It is something that has jumped, it has gone under the radar, it has gone under the loops for so long. It has been misconstrued by Waki. I mean, it's under the radar, it's been thrown under the carpet by from all those other commissions that have been written. Within the TGRC report, a whole table of a whole implementation plan has been developed that hasn't been thought about. There was the 2015 10 billion fund. And now again, I actually overheard Justice Senior Orengo, saying that the money that has been used, they're using for BBI, is actually that was used for the 10 billion that was given by His Excellency. I thought that was wrong. That also says that there's somebody around the president who doesn't show him or who doesn't express to him the seriousness of sexual and gender-based violence. And that it is left now up to you and us and all of us as a sector to actually show that. to show that the seriousness and the implications of it. There are women who have got children, and allow me just to share that there are other women who have got children, and they and for example, Kikuyus were getting raped by Luyas, and Kalenjins were getting raped by Luos, and so many a times they just there's a stigma against the tribe itself. It's something you cannot remove. Humaneness, Lady Justice, you're trying to look for that word. The humaneness, ile utu ya mtu kufikiria kwamba hii kabila ilinifanyia hivi siwezi, I cannot get married to these people, I can never associate with these people, sitaki to do anything with these people. That thing is still in the communities, and that is with survivors of sexual violence. We're talking about now children who are 12 years old, who will be 12. What do you think those mothers tell those children? Or has anybody thought about what those mothers tell the children? My daughter was asking me the other day, who's my dad and where's my dad? And why do other people have dads and me, I don't have my dad? I know the big children, their dad died. But what about mine? What happened to mine? And I felt like going historical on her, but then I just realized it was just a very innocent question from a child. And I just wanted to give her a very innocent answer. And I just said, he's no longer in our lives, that's all. So if you wanted to know, why isn't he in our lives? You know? And I said, that's a question I can answer another day, because now I was just getting internal turmoil, and I was unable to manage that answer right now. So that just shows you that I've not worked out that small thing inside there that a Kikuyu raped me. And it maybe at the back of my mind, it might influence the way I want to believe that it doesn't, but it might influence, not for me, but for others, it might influence how they interact with other Kenyans also. That is a legacy that needs to change. And since you are able to speak and share these things, use that platform also to speak for us. And lastly, that apart from the justice system, there's the other side of hope. You, as the justice system, represent what we perceive as hope. If you don't give us to us, then in my opinion, you have failed to serve as to serve your judicial responsibility and your citizens' rights to serve justice in your offices. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. We'll have Jackie from ODPP now.
Thank you very much. I would want to end the discussion by answering a question that was asked by one of our participants on what exactly it is we are doing during this COVID period, or how are we assisting in issues during the COVID period. We must appreciate that the battle against SGBV cannot be fought alone. So as ODPP, what we are doing, we have engaged in a multi-sectoral approach where we work with quite a number of institutions so that we are able to push ahead SGBV cases through investigations, and before prosecution, of course, finding support and shelter for our victims who have nowhere to go after they are violated. And indeed, as ODPP, we have gone further and we have what we call a toll-free line, where if you don't feel satisfied by how you've been assisted during investigation, or you're not getting any help at all, you can always call ODPP. The number is 0800 72 33 77. In addition to that, other than having our own free toll-free number, we're also working with other institutions that have the toll-free number. Case in point is the 1195, so that we are able to hasten assistance for our victims. Of course, other than that, through the helping through the toll-free number, we're also assisting. You have realized that we have very many complaints coming through the social media platforms. We are now on top of things and taking up the matters and going and following up with the parties involved. Quite a number of matters have been forwarded to us. So we have been supporting our victims by following up in places where they are stuck when they are trying to get assistance. And of course, lastly, the fight against SGBV is not smooth. We also have challenges as ODPP, we have challenges as a criminal justice system. First and foremost, we have a challenge with our first responders, like Jacqueline mentioned. When you go and seek assistance from the first responder, we know, and especially if you're a woman, what questions they are likely to ask were you the one who brought it upon yourself? So we have, like I mentioned earlier, we are assisting our victims through the investigation process. We are also assisting them through shelter. And in case of shelters, Christine or Judge mentioned that we don't have government shelters. So we have been working with quite a number of civil societies to help them get a home they can call, a place they can call home before their matter is addressed. Finally, as ODPP, we have also set up a victim support unit, and we are facilitating our victims through the process right from the beginning with issues of if they're not able to get accommodation during the trial and pre-trial process. Going forward, the DPP will be assisting maybe in incurring some expenses for travel and other expenses that will be needed, and other form of support like psychosocial support. Thank you very much. I end there.
All right, thank you, Jackie. And we'll request you to just, on the comment section, to write for us the toll-free line. But just to repeat it, 0800 723 377. But also look out at our comment section where we will write it down. Over to you now, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this really enlightening, elaborate, insightful discussions that we're having. And I do hope, as Justice had mentioned, that this will be a continuing conversation. We've had organizations that have been particularly focused on various aspects of response and prevention. And I'm glad that today we were able to focus our attention on investigations. There was one question that we had missed out, but I think Jackie has touched on it with regard to safe houses. And yes, indeed, the response is there are no government established safe houses in Kenya today as we speak. The very first government established safe house was recently launched in Makueni County. And so Makueni County is trailblazing on this aspect. And we hope that numerous other counties will do the same. Now, I think where I wanted to end at was where we began. We began by asking ourselves what the state's obligations are. And what we have identified is that these state obligations are interconnected. Even though the obligation to investigate and prosecute is a standalone obligation, it is not possible to achieve it without the state fulfilling its other obligations that are related with protection, which includes access to healthcare, access to psychosocial support, addressing trauma, safety of witnesses and victims, reparations, and looking at access to justice more broadly. And so we have to come back full circle. And coming back full circle is really to continue to emphasize that the state obligations are not possible to be achieved without a change of mindset. I think after years of working on this issue, after years of engaging with survivors, we have come to the conclusion that for as long as the state does not invest in providing sufficient budgetary allocation, effective institutional mechanisms, effective capacity development, specialized capacity, not just broadly speaking, then we will continue to identify these gaps. And so with investment, just to highlight a few things that I hope we can be able to do with a change of mindset that is then provided with corresponding investments and resource allocation. One, we can have the ODPP GBV unit scaled down to every county level. So Jackie today represents the ODPP unit. She has just a few colleagues of hers, at least from the study we did last year, across the country. It would be great to see specialized units at every county level. With increased investments, we can begin to see specialized courts dealing with SGBV across this country. With increased investments, we can begin to see establishment of one-stop centers. Guess what? The provision of one-stop centers was provided as a requirement under Vision 2030 many years ago, more than a decade ago. So one would wonder, why is it that 10, 12, 15 years later, we still have not been able to achieve establishment of government-run safe houses and one-stop centers? We need adequate investment for this. With sufficient investment, we can begin to establish this interconnected, multi-sectoral referral pathway that Justice mentioned, where communities are working hand in hand with the police, working hand in hand with the health sector, working hand in hand with the judiciary, all the way to ensure that survivors do not shy away from accessing justice, but are in fact empowered to be able to do so. And finally, with increased resources, we can begin to see the state take proactive steps to investigate and prosecute politically instigated sexual and gender-based violence. This is one area that we cannot shy away from. We have reached a point where we have to call a spade a spade. Over 50% of the cases that are reported with regard to election-related violence are committed by state security officers. And yet, after every election cycle, we come back and what we hear from the state is, sorry, if you're not able to identify that police officer, there's nothing we can do for you. Where is the commander? Where is the Inspector General of Police? The law is available. The state is failing us. We must begin to hold politicians, state security officers, and all those actors who are responsible for violating in huge numbers, thousands of women like Jackie today are waiting for justice. But because the politics is not right, we're not going to make our institutions work for us. This must change. And we can only do so by joining hands, all of us. It's not ICJ's business only. It's not Justice's business. It's not Jackie's business only. It's all our business. We must begin to do our part and appreciate that as long as you and I are not the changed mindset, then we cannot begin to see that changed mindset with regard to access to justice. Thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that we can all join hands and begin to create a different narrative for our nation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Christine, for those very passionate comments on what needs to be done. I must join my voice to yours in saying that there needs to be investment in this area, because as we all know, as it has come out very clearly, the victim of SGBV cannot be expected to do everything to get the case out there, because they are their most vulnerable point in their lives, at the point where they are recording their statements, they are coming to testify in court, and they are pursuing justice for themselves. Let me say this: my rallying call has always been that, and I say it in Kiswahili, that haki ni jukumu la kila mtu. For me to get justice, you and I and all of us must work together, because the justice of every person depends on the other person. And for victims of STBV, their justice depends on all of us. So I can never stop saying that. The other thing is that I have a problem with not statistics per se, but we have to remember that every number, Alexa, every number, every statistic represents a person. And from Jacqueline's Mutere's presentation, not just herself, her child, her other children, her family around her, so that when she's seeking for justice for herself, it's not just for herself, but for all those people. And what happens to her rolls down back to all these people. So I can't, you know, I like us to have numbers, but that number must always be attached to an individual who has undergone a very individual, personal experience. Where am I going with this? For the judiciary to be able to do its work, for us to be able to give justice, we have a legal system that requires certain things to be done. And for as long as that system is in place, then the people who investigate these cases, the people who prosecute these cases must remember that they owe it to the victims to do their part. All the victim needs to say, I was done this at this place, and this is what happened, and so did it. So who is going to make sure that this victim's story meets the threshold that is required by our law as it is now, so that they can get that justice they need of the conviction and that compensation or reparation that we are talking about? There is someone responsible. And I think Christine has laid it down very well, that money needs to be put where it is needed. I also wanted to add that we have a DCI unit. Maybe you are aware of it, the one that deals with, I think, trafficking and violence against children. And we've seen them doing a very good job, even getting people who have run out of this country convicted for sexual violence against children. I think we've seen that. Some people who are running children homes and they end up somewhere in their foreign countries and they are followed up to their doorstep and they are convicted. It means if we put our house in order, our whole house in order, people will not get away with the things that they're doing. What needs to be done? Oh, I have so much I could say what needs to be done. But the one-stop place, I have never understood why a victim must go to a clinic to do where, then go to the police station, another place, then I don't know, somebody has to come from Nairobi to come and pick DNA, and it has to go somewhere else. When, as we are saying, we have a crisis in this country that is tearing our families apart. This one, whoever has the muscle must fight for it, because I am sure the day we have this, certain things will change. The whole thing will change, because someone will find that if I'm violated, I go to a place where everybody there, from the police officer, from the gate man, from the cleaner, from everyone, knows what it means for me to come to this particular place and deal with me accordingly. So we must fight for that. Yesterday, there was the launch of the JJMS, the Juvenile Justice Information Management System at Makadara Law Courts. And one of the things that Christine has talked about is a system where we are able to follow everyone who goes through this kind of thing, from the point of reporting to the point the matter is finalized, because we have to create a standard where this victim is, you know, treated with the same standards by every player along the way, and where information is captured and shared appropriately. But more importantly, in the court,
I think your internet just disconnected for a bit. Judge, can you hear us? All right.
In the system of things where there's the effort to color code files. Went off. Is it back? Is it back now?
Yes, now we're back.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. What I was saying is that more importantly, in matters accelerating, expediting matters. I remember we came up with, there was this thing about color coding of files, and for children matters, it was proposed that they be white. So that if you saw a white file sitting in front of you or in the registry or somewhere, you know it represents a child and all that pertains to a child. So maybe we need to come up with, in the criminal justice system, from the police stations, that a matter is marked, a matter is identified as a matter that requires certain things, so that the officer there is able to deal with it in the manner it's supposed to be dealt with. When it lands at the DPP's office, the officer there is aware that this matter needs certain urgency. When it lands at the desk of the magistrate, you know, and the judge, all that kind of thing. So these are practical things that we can do that I think can also help us. When we create the consciousness, we raise the awareness, and we spread the knowledge that this is what needs to be done, then we create what I usually say visible things, visible, what do you say, marks, visible landmarks around the system that the victim can see. If I enter here, I start from here, and I can see where it is ending. That way, maybe we'll help ourselves. And working together, I'm sure we can do it. And as I end, I just want to say that I'm sure as a part and parcel of the judiciary, we are not sitting back. There may be so many challenges, like everyone is meeting them. But when a matter lands before me as a judicial officer, and before any other, you will see that that person tries as much as possible to deal with it in accordance with the urgency it has. That person, if I'm transferred, another person picks up the file, and you'll actually see that that person who picks it up tries to also deal with it with the urgency that it deserves. In some matters, you'll find even judicial officers going overboard. Some of you who are here will find a magistrate saying, no, I'll hear this case, Jacqueline, you'll agree with me, Jackie, that it says, I'll hear this case, the evidence of the victim next week. And then the lawyer for the accused will say, no, we have not prepared, we have not seen the statements, we can't do that. But because the magistrate is aware, if this child stays longer, they will forget, they'll be interfered with. You see them insisting. So if we work together, we can ensure that all these little things that make life so hard for Jacqueline and the others within our system of things, because we are all responsible, all those little things that make it difficult will be removed, or at least there'll be a bit of easing of the system so that we enable victims of gender-based violence to come to the system and find a system that is welcoming and responsive to their needs. So I'll end by just saying we can't do it alone. We must do it together to get justice for victims. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Judge, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and our distinguished panelists. We have all good things must come to an end, and we've come to the close of today's webinar, from which we've picked critical recommendations and insights from our distinguished panelists. At ICJ, I must restate that we prioritize the quest for justice for human rights violations, and we take the position that sexual and gender-based violence is a human right violation, as aptly pointed out by Christine Alai. We will not relent in our engagements to highlight the plight of victims, seek justice, and engage the duty bearers in the criminal justice chain, such as the police, the prosecution, and the courts. Our rallying call, if I may echo and borrow one of my favorite missions, law is but a means, justice is the end. So on behalf of ICJ Kenya and the Secretariat team, the team of crew that have supported us, I extend my sincere gratitude to all our distinguished panelists and laud them for their continued commitment to promoting and protecting the human rights in Kenya. Thank you, Jacqueline Mutere. Thank you, Christine Alai, ICJ Kenya member. Thank you, Jacqueline Jagi of the ODPP. And finally, but not least, Honorable Lady Justice Teresa Mafeka. I thank my co-moderator, Teresa Mutua, for an excellent discussion and engaging. Finally, I extend all our gratitude to our participants who joined us on our webinar today, including on our social media platforms. This conversation, as we said, is not ending, and we will continue to see you hopefully next week for yet another ICJ Kenya Justice and Rule of Law webinar series. Asanteni sana and have a great afternoon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.